I'm working at the Canadian Medical Association, as was mentioned earlier, and I thought maybe I better spend a few seconds to tell you what the Canadian Medical Association is. And at the very end, I'll give you a sentence about why I had to tell you a little bit about us as an organization. So we represent physicians. About 75,000 physicians in Canada belong to the CMA. There are about 90,000 physicians overall, so it's a huge proportion of docs. You don't have to belong. You don't have to. So people give their money every single year in the order of about $400 a year in order to keep the organization functioning, because they actually think we're going to do something useful for them. And there are about 115 of us working at the Canadian Medical Association, and I have a staff of about 5 people that work on this area of public health policy. I work in an area called the Directorate for Research and Policy. It's all we do is policy and research work. So with my little staff, I would have to say, I really think it would be true if I said that virtually every single question that touched on population or public health that came to the attention of the Canadian Medical Association would end up crossing my desk at some point, and it is extremely funny what you see. Some of the stuff is quite profound, and some of it is a little silly, like plastic bags and recycling. Anyway, one of the very first policy topics I undertook at the Canadian Medical Association was to try and find ways of, as I thought of at the time, I was new, revolutionizing the Canadian Medical Association's approach to environmental health. You know, I was very pleased to learn that the World Medical Association, which is all of the medical associations of the world, was actually undertaking a 3-year review of the impact of the environment on health. And they were going to begin with a review of the impact of global climate change. I was really excited to hear about this, and I expressed my interest, and then I was asked to write the background paper, which is a reminder to all of you to be careful about what you tell people. Anyway, the paper was really actually a great big success. I was thrilled. I'd never been flattered. Nobody had ever said, gee, Maura, you did a good job. Yes, I did work in government for a long time. And it really was nice. You know, they even gave the paper a name. It's called the Delhi paper. It was adopted in Delhi. And WMA had satellite meetings, and they managed to get themselves on some of the pre-conference agenda in Copenhagen. So with that all on its feet and flushed with success, back home, the team started working on a plan about how we'd actually change medical practice. I'm working at the Canadian Medical Association, right? It's got to be useful to doctors. Doctors have to find it relevant, or what am I there for? No reason at all. So we developed a screening tool that physicians could use to screen for environmental health problems. We did a huge literature review in the area. We actually contracted out a group of totally too smart people to create a model of the impact of air pollution on health, and you can apply it in your city if your city's large enough, and in various provinces. When we announced this thing at the General Council a few years ago, we got huge coverage in the press, huge coverage in the press. And if anybody's read the recent Fraser Institute paper on this matter, just be assured, they're wrong. So as the dust began to settle, as I say, we started to ask ourselves what we really knew about what physicians needed to have in regards to climate change and environmental degradation. So we actually organized 4 focus groups and started listening to what the physicians themselves actually had to say on the subject, and what they said was nothing. I don't mean they didn't say anything. They said, we don't need nothing. We don't need nothing on this area. They said, you know, if they have a person who comes in who's got asthma, and the asthma is caused by a dog or a dander or by mold, or it's caused by air pollution, what the? It doesn't matter. They deal with it in exactly the same way regardless. In fact, we couldn't find a single medical condition in which it mattered whether to the average practitioner, I'm not talking about specialists, to the average practitioner, whether it was caused by the environment or any other thing that you can think of, not a single medical condition. So, you know, they clearly had a need for awareness. You know, and West Nile virus is an example of a virus that swept through the country over 2 or 3 years. Now we'll see progressively less of it, I imagine, over time. All they need to know, they just need to know a few things, but they don't need to do anything particularly different in their practices. All they really wanted was that the Medical Association should advocate for a better environment so that they wouldn't have to see the health impacts in daily clinical practice. That's it. That's all they wanted. I can't tell you how much I wish we'd asked them sooner. That was like 2 years before we got off this topic and onto something else they really wanted. And so my lesson number one in converting science and evidence into policy is that you should make sure you have an audience for your policy. So recently I actually undertook a look at a newly minted recommendation on bystander CPR that was published by the Canadian Association for Emergency Physicians. And I took it to our committee on healthcare and promotion, asked them to have a look at it, fully expecting that they were going to just go, bam. You know, they're going to say, yes, that's just the most brilliant thing we've ever seen, and voila. Me, and my job is to produce policy in public health, right? That's what I get paid for. So for 15 minutes worth of work, bam, I'd be able to get a tick box, one more piece of policy the organization's adopted. Oh my God. You know, to my astonishment, the proposal was completely disliked. They dissed it, absolutely dissed it. They disagreed with the evidence base, they disagreed with the interpretation of the literature. They couldn't have disagreed more profoundly with anything in it. And I made the biggest mistake possible, especially if you're an obsessive compulsive kind of person like myself. I didn't know the literature. I really didn't. I read the paper. It was written by totally top-notch experts, and I didn't actually know the literature. And I didn't know the literature because we'd made a false assumption that the committee would take the word of experts as written, and they didn't. They wouldn't. They absolutely wouldn't. It took us about 3 months of work back and forth between the committee members and between the experts. And we're talking about experts, like these are the people who sit on the international committees that develop guidelines for these things. And eventually we were able to seesaw back and forth between our committee members who are expert clinicians. Don't underestimate the value of a person who's in the field and has had to observe someone or the results of bystander CPR in the emergency room. We were able to get down to one final single point of contention. The CAPE, Canadian Association for Emergency Physicians, regarded bystander CPR as an ethical duty, and the Canadian Medical Association just couldn't go along with that. It didn't matter in the long run. We're actually now a member of their communications committee. You know, they sort of saw that there was a kind of a different way of approaching this problem. So my lesson number 2 is there are no policy shortcuts. No policy shortcuts. It's not easy to make good policy and have it actually come to fruition. The last policy experience I'd like to share with you has to do with the social determinants of health. And when I arrived at the Canadian Medical Association about 4 years ago and sat with my CEO and some of the members of the board, I was actually informed that the organization did not see a role for physicians or for physician organizations in addressing the social determinants of health. Because, well, think about it, they're the social determinants of health. They're not the medical determinants of health. This is the Canadian Medical Association, not to put too fine a point on it. Anyway, over the course of several years, staff members, interested board members, we were having conversations about this all the time. I mean, I was like a dog with a bone. And these conversations with the board began to take on a different tone. And in fact, when we got a new president 2 years ago, we get a new president every year, and he indicated a strong interest in this area, and he was a vital leader in the medical community, we suddenly had an opportunity to do something. And our team was ready because we've been talking about the situation for literally years. And so normally, you know, so we knew we had the material that we had in order to move this forward, but now I also understood the organization much better than I used to. So normally this type of paper is written over the course of minimum months, and often a year or more, because we have a cycle for policy review, especially if something is even vaguely controversial. We pass iterations of documents through our committee for review. We pass it to the board. It can come back, go to the board, come back, go back. They meet only 4 times a year. You can already see how this can slow down the policy flow. And then eventually it goes to our delegates at the annual general council. So you've got 500 docs sitting around a room, and people get up and speak at the microphone, speaking against or for, and there is a vote of the general council. You do not know what is going to happen when people get up and start talking about these things. So we were really, really worried that we would not get a chance to finish this paper and take it to the General Council before the one-year mandate of our current president was over. And we didn't know who the next president would be. As it turns out, we had nothing to worry about, but we really weren't sure at that point. So my boss had a solution. He said, get a mandate. So what we did, we went to the General Council, and we made sure that they had a chance to decide whether or not they wanted to continue examining the issue. And we asked them to make proposals for content. Well, we had like 20 GC resolutions and policy. They're from all over the place. Nothing too, there was a pattern to them, but it wasn't as if we were trying to fill in holes and blanks. We just got a whole bunch of stuff that we could actually use. And it was such a powerful support for the proposal that we've been working on this project now for another year or so. And in fact, when GC happens in Yellowknife this year, we'll be presenting our policy paper. We'll have actually done field work, completed our field work on how some Canadian physicians are actually changing their practices in order to create equity within their practice setting. We'll be hosting Sir Michael Marmot, and please don't tell me you don't know who he is. He's the chair, please. Anyway, he's the chair of the WHO Commission on the Social Determinants of Health. It's pretty much good enough. If you don't know who he is, Google him as soon as you get back to your computer. And Dr. David Butler-Jones, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Health for Canada. We'll be hosting them at the GC in Yellowknife to talk about this very issue. We'll have 2 full sessions of the GC. There are only 4 sessions. 2 full sessions of the GC will be on just exactly this topic. So I think my final sort of policy lesson is that it isn't entirely a mechanical process. And sometimes having heart and passion around something does make a difference. It doesn't always, so be prepared for a lot of disappointment in your life as you move forward in this area. But my lesson number 3 is that if you believe in something, be patient and make sure you give your audience the time to catch up to you. You already know way more than most of the people you're talking to do in any policy area when you approach them. And you need to give people time to change, especially if there's a major paradigm shift. And I think that some of the art, as well as the science of policy making, is that we rarely understand all of the unspoken assumptions that are coming from our audience. We rarely truly understand their point of view. And you must understand and believe somebody else's point of view if you actually want to change their mind on something. And it is essential then that you are able to lay out in a very respectful manner all of the implicit assumptions that underline the steps that you take before you make explicit assumptions. This is a major, major step. And when I mentioned the thing about the emergency physicians, the stopping point was an issue of ethics. Once they didn't like the ethics, they criticized everything else. It took us 3 months to figure out that that was the issue. It was really tough. And I guess I'm thinking about the presentation that we just had. If you do not understand all of these tools and rules that were alluded to, you'll be a failure as a policymaker for sure. You have to know your business very, very well. You have to know the science, how you deal with these things. You must have a huge armamentarium of policy tools at your instant disposal. I think you're like a watchmaker, basically. You know how to make watches, but you have no idea if you're going to make I might say this wrong and you'll laugh at me, but like a Philippe Patel or one of these fancy watches. You could be working for them. Sometimes they turn out things like chronographs that you see astronauts using, and sometimes they turn out these funny white watches with 10 diamonds on them. That's what's going to happen to your policy. You are the watchmaker, and you just don't know what's going to be sold in the end of it. So know your tools, be very aware of the options that are available to you, and then step back. If you're lucky, you'll actually get the thing that you really want to see. If you're not lucky, you'll be just like me. You'll be sitting here in front of a bunch of people from Carleton University talking about small disappointments that happened in your life and few successes. Thank you very much for your attention.